Recently, my lack of intelligence led me to bathe in the disgusting cesspool that is Ubisoft Connect, where once thriving franchises are left to rot, deformed and empty in the midst of monthly subscriptions and Ubisoft coins. Anyway, the reason for this is because in my YouTube prestige, I was able to gain a closed beta key for their newest game, XDefiant, and I have to rush this video before you inevitably forget this game exists. Now, the subtext of that sentence might lead you to believe the game is hot garbage, but that's not true. The game is fine. In fact, in its current beta, it doesn't suffer from the problems new releases these days have. It's at least playable. Cough, cough. It's relatively polished, relatively in cash, but I'd still count it as a win. It's a beta after all. There's only so much to be expected. And the UI is shit, but it's the controlled kind of shit. More Overwatch than Battlefield 2042. No, what makes this game an inevitable failure is the basic idea behind it. The game is an amalgamation of dissonant gameplay styles. Let me explain what that means. You see, the game is very reminiscent of fast-paced Call of Duty-like action, which rewards individualism and player performance. But the game is also sort of character-based, and character-based games push for teamwork and collaboration through unique abilities. So in trying to achieve a midpoint between these vastly different gameplay styles, you end up making the game feel awkward and lackluster. There's a reason most games are filled with the same 2 to 3 abilities and characters, but I'll get back to that. You see, there are 2 components to making a good Call of Duty game: the satisfaction of the gunplay and the movement, and this game currently fails at both. The movement feels weirdly rigid as opposed to the fluid movements and freedom of COD mobility. The gunplay feels limiting and clunky, and the time to kill feels too long for a game this fast paced. For those reasons, XDefiant ends up feeling more like a cheap ripoff than a competitor. But these are all beta problems which will likely get fixed or at least polished before release. Next, I'm going to talk about the character abilities, which definitely need to be changed. Okay, so for context, there are 5 factions. I didn't get to try the 5th faction, so I'll stick with 4 factions. Each faction has 2 abilities and the player has to pick one. These 2 abilities seem to be variations of each other. They give the player 2 ways to play the same type of ability. If you want to focus on health regeneration, you have 2 playstyles. The problem there is that the second variation is substantially worse on every faction. For the cleaners, the second variation is Firebomb. A Molotov is thrown where you stand, so if someone pushes you, they die. The reason this is useless is because it requires a player to push you in very close quarters and only works around corners. Why would you ever choose this compared to the stim shot? I don't know. Honestly, the cleaners just suck in general. The first ability is just fine. A drone that rains on fire is thrown directly, which feels too underpowered. The drone is satisfying but slow, and not being able to change the curve of the trajectory really limits the use. The Blitz shield is the second variation for the Phantoms. This sucks ass not only compared to the first shield but just in general. It's the least ability used in my experience simply because it's not fun. In Call of Duty, people use the shield so that they wouldn't get shot from behind, and that not being an option makes this fucking useless. Next is El Libertad. It's a variation on the stim shot and it's not that bad, but the stim is just way better, making it useless. The fact that you have to throw it and it stays stationary in a game that encourages movement makes it only good in certain situations. Also, needing to hold a button to take it back isn't great. The Echelons have invisibility and wall hack. This is easily the most used faction because both abilities are great. If the game is going to insist on abilities, they need to be more focused. Abilities need to be powerful enough that the player needs to be a fucking idiot not to use them. They also need to expand on movement or gunplay because that's the main gameplay loop of the game. Any ability that limits the player just won't get picked. Like, for example, a shield that isn't even good at being a shield and also fucking sucks. Anyway, I don't think that any of this will doom the game. It might even be great. What will doom the game and why I think it's going to fail miserably is because they are targeting the nostalgia of the old COD games. A very big part of the game's marketing is how they wanted to replicate the feel of the old COD games and how they're gonna listen to the community for improvements. And I mean, that's great. Listening to the community for improvements is great, but you will fail. A large portion of the audience you are reeling in doesn't want the old COD games. They simply want to feel the way they felt when they first played them. It's the nature of nostalgia. These people are blind because they only remember the good parts. When there are undoubtedly bad times in your games, guess who they're gonna blame? These people will give you advice and advice constantly on how to make this game better, and you will follow it, and they will still leave because the game doesn't matter. Again, that's the nature of nostalgia. When they're getting destroyed even without skill-based matchmaking, they will just come up with some other bullshit to blame in order to excuse their poor performance. I genuinely think Activision played the best hand possible. At some point they realized that even if they tried to give their community what they wanted, they would run the risk of that community getting smart and realizing the nostalgia baiting bullshit that's being pulled. So what they did was fill the community with hope that that's what they were trying to do while also changing things. They knew that giving them things to complain about would keep them coming back while also bringing in new people. And now COD is about as removed from their original fans as possible. 5 months without new content in their latest game. And guess what? They got to milk those fuckers to their very last drop. And of course you realize this. That's why you're making such a big deal about bringing COD back. You saw a community with no home and are trying to suck them in before another comes along. If you can keep these fuckers wanting something you won't give them, you can ride this bitch for another few years, make tons of money. Because if there's one thing you can count on is Ubisoft trying to suck you in with empty promises and tickle your small nostalgia-filled brain for profit. The funniest part about this is now they're doing it with properties they don't even own. It's like they finally realized there's only so much flesh left in the rotting, deceased bodies they constantly advertise, Weekend at Bernie's style. Hey Ubisoft, where's Skull and Bones at? A question Ubisoft responds with, the characters in this game are based on our other games too. Thank God, now we can play as the Libertad from Far Cry 6. A game nobody liked with characters nobody remembers. It's like Ubisoft saw the multiverse shit Marvel was doing and the success of Super Smash Bros. And thought they can replicate it. Only to remember they don't have any characters people give a shit about anymore. They've been running on nostalgia for a fucking decade. Their games are not based on characters and story, they're based on lowering player expectations so that their audiences won't be too surprised when there's an item shop for a single player game. By the way, that wasn't a joke. The factions are all from previous Ubisoft games. When I first saw this, I got really confused on the story aspect, wondering the length they are willing to go to have these nameless characters and icons on screen. To what degree of insanity had they driven their writers to explain this BS, only to find out there is no story or setting behind this game. These people just appeared and started fighting or whatever. And honestly, I'm not mad about that, but it is weird to think that there is an equal possibility of their next map being a futuristic ruined Paris or a map of ancient Rome from Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Frankly, what's the point of being ambiguous about setting if you don't use it to its full extent? If they don't add a map set in Brazil during the Mesozoic era, then consider that wasted too. Anyway, subscribe and like the video if you want, and have a good day.